Okay, so you've done an investigation now with exponential graphs, and we're looking for some patterns to make graphing easier. After doing all the investigation and answering the questions, a couple of things you should have noticed is what we're going to talk about here. So first thing is an exponential equation has this pattern that we've talked about before, y equals a, b to the x. A, that number in front, always determines or will show on the graph the y-intercept, that point where the graph crosses the y-axis. As we move away from graphing and into exponential applications, we're going to notice that that A value, that y-intercept, is also known as the initial value, or wherever the graph starts or wherever the problem starts. So it's also known as the initial value. B is the base. The base affects the graph. It determines the direction of the graph and how steep the graph is. So you would have noticed when you were graphing with Desmos, when you graph 2 to the x, 3 to the x, 4 to the x, as the base got higher, the graph got steeper. When you graphed half to the x, like 0.5 to the x, or 0.25 to the x, or 1/3 to the x, that the direction of the graph changed when it was a fraction or a decimal, and the steepness changed as well. So you have to be careful. If the base is greater than 1, you're going to remember that the graph will always increase to the right. The higher the number, the steeper the graph is. If the base is between 0 and 1, so that means it's a fraction or a decimal, the graph decreases to the right, so that means it goes down to the right. However, it's a little bit different. The lower numbers make a steeper graph. So a quarter, 0.25, is steeper than a half, 0.5. What that means to our graphs is instead of having to make a great big table of values, we should be able to use those patterns to quickly sketch a graph and get a rough idea of what it looks like. So the patterns being knowing something about the base and knowing something about that initial value. So I'm going to do my first graph in red. That's why I put the little red dot there. I should put a bit of a scale on my graph. So let's put a bit of a scale on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. 1, 2, 3, 5. All right, so there's my scale. So when I look at that first equation, I see that initial number, A. That tells me my y-intercept is 7. So it crosses the y-axis at 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to put a point there because I know that it's starting there. And then I know that I have a base of 2. So when the base is 2, that tells me a couple of things. It tells me the graph rises to the right, and it tells me it's kind of steep, not as steep as if the base were higher than 2. So I'm going to make my nice curve starting out here, and it's just going to go up to the right. And there's my graph. Done. If I look at the next one, I'm going to do it in green. My initial value this time is 3. So it crosses the y-axis at 3. Its base is 5. So that means it's going to be much steeper than the first graph I made because the base is much higher. To show that it's much steeper, I'll start my curve the same way, but it's going to go up very, very quickly and get almost straight. So it's much steeper than the first one. And the third one, I do it in blue. My initial value is 6 this time. So the y-intercept is 6. But this time my base is a fraction or a decimal, 0.5. So when I draw it, that means it's going to go down to the right and curve. So I have a harder time drawing these ones. All right, there we go. Down to the right. And the last one, my initial value is 4. So it crosses the y-axis at 4. And the base is 0.2, which is lower than 0.5. So that will mean it's a decimal, it goes down to the right, and it's lower than 0.5, so it'll actually be steeper than the blue one. So it will be more straight. Getting a shadow on my projector here. There we go. Whoa, cool. Let's undo that. There. And there's my graph. Steeper than the 0.5. So I want to take you guys to take those patterns and try these questions. And then use Desmos, the graphing calculator on Desmos, to check those 5 graphs. And then we'll talk about the 2 little word problems.